Imagine earning millions of dollars but losing it all in just one snap because of its legality. The promise of the rich is a powerful enticement for those people with money to invest. They speak convincingly and directly to the human need. What would you do if a rich man offered you full security and prosperity through passive investments? In this video, we will talk about the famous and one of the richest men that scammed the world. Meet Charles Ponzi, who is known for his Ponzi schemes. Charles is believed to be the inventor of this type of scam, which is a perfect example of a financial misrepresentation used to swindle cash from investors. It all started in the early 20th century when Ponzi convinced thousands of investors that they would get a 40 to 50% return on their investment in international postal reply coupons, IPRCs, in just 90 days. Charles Ponzi, or Carlo, Pietro, Giovanni, Guglielmo, Tebaldo Ponzi, was born on March 3, 1882, in a busy town of Lugo in northern Italy. Both his parents, Oreste and Imelda Ponzi, came from a wealthy family in Italy, which became borderline poor by the time he was born. At a very young age, Ponzi had already shown criminal tendencies, such as stealing from his parents and even from parish priests. As he grew up, his parents enrolled him in Sapienza University in Rome. During his stay in the university, Ponzi, by his own account, was less than a model student. This was also when Ponzi was introduced to America. During his university years, Ponzi had heard stories of other Italians traveling to the United States to find fame and fortune. As a result, he finally decided that this was the only course left open for him and that he didn't want to continue his studies in Italy. 4 years after studying, Ponzi was forced to leave the school with no money and no degree. Ponzi then started traveling from Italy to the United States. He moved from one state and city to another. However, after moving to several cities, which included Pittsburgh, New York, New Haven, Connecticut, and Providence, Ponzi ended up residing in Montreal, Canada. During his stay in Canada, he worked as a bank teller. However, the bank went under and collapsed, leaving the financial community upset and at the same time hopeless. Ponzi also lost his job, which forced him to turn back to his old ways, committing crimes. Amid his struggle, Ponzi continued his way of living by committing crimes. One time, Ponzi was busted and convicted for forgery charges, leaving him in a 3-year stretch in prison in Quebec. However, despite his criminal history, it didn't stop him from committing more crimes. In fact, his criminal acts continued even after his release. He started helping criminals to smuggle Italian immigrants into the United States. However, he was then again busted and convicted, giving him 2 more years in prison in Atlanta. In November 1903, Ponzi arrived in Boston aboard the SS Vancouver. According to Ponzi, in his autobiography titled The Rise of Mr. Ponzi, before he left Italy, he had with him $200. However, when he arrived in Boston, America, his money dwindled down to $2.50. The $200 had dwindled down to $2.50 on the way over, and a card sharp had taken me for most of it, and the tips and the bar the rest of it, Ponzi wrote in his autobiography. After a few years of staying in the U.S., Ponzi managed to learn English and perform odd jobs. On Memorial Day in 1917, while Ponzi was in Boston, he met a young girl on a streetcar platform. During that time, he wrote another letter where he said, "One glance at her, at that picture of loveliness and kindness and clean vivacity, one look into her deep, dark, smiling eyes, at that pretty round face framed in a background of gorgeous curls, I was no longer able to remove my eyes from her." The girl was later identified as Rose Necco. The two eventually dated, and in February 1918, they got married. A few months later, Ponzi began working several jobs and ended up working at his father-in-law's grocery store. Rose's father's business was an import-export company. They also had a fruit company, which collapsed shortly after it was launched. Through ups and downs, Rose was always by Charles's side. She stayed with him during the tough times until they started experiencing the dizzying ride to riches. They eventually bought a 12-room mansion, hired servants, and purchased a custom-built limousine. However, Ponzi's scheme was not always successful. In fact, it failed, and he was jailed for it with mail fraud charges. After Ponzi got deported, he and Rose divorced in the mid-1930s. But 2 years later, in August of 1919, Charles Ponzi, who was still in Boston at that time, received an international postal reply coupon from an acquaintance in Italy. The coupons helped Ponzi handle small international transactions. During that time, all people who received coupons could exchange them for stamps at their local post office, and Ponzi realized that the coupon he had received from Italy was bought in Spain. He also discovered that the reason for this was that the price of the coupons in Spain at that time were exceptionally low. For him, this could be another opportunity for arbitrage. While Ponzi was thinking for his next move, he envisioned a huge money-making scheme where dollar funds could be converted into Spanish pesetas and use them to buy international post reply coupons that would be transported to the United States and be redeemed in U.S. postage stamps, which could be sold for dollars. Ponzi saw this as an opportunity that would introduce him to fast, unlimited profits. However, there was a problem with the scheme. If anyone started exploiting the discrepancies in the prices of international postal reply coupons in other nations, the discrepancies would be noticed, flagged, and then corrected, which would put the profit opportunity at risk. However, this didn't stop Ponzi from making his vision possible. He founded and launched a company that would exploit the profit opportunity in international postal reply coupons. Ponzi named it the Security and Exchange Company. The Security and Exchange Commission, SEC, was not launched until the 1930s, so Ponzi would not attempt to mislead potential investors by giving his company a name similar to SEC, which is a federal agency. After that, Ponzi began circulating literature that offered potential investors 40% return in just 90 days. At the time, the prevailing interest was only 5% every year, making Ponzi's proposal a very attractive one. This was when Ponzi's publicity began. Ponzi became prominent to the immigrant community of the North End of Boston. In January 1920, Ponzi's scheme started in small amounts, but he later increased the promised rate from 40% of return to 100% in 90 days and 50% in 45 days. As a result, the cash flow in his scheme became a torrent by February, which forced him to hire 6 clerks who were constantly working to take in all the money that Ponzi would later deposit in a mutual savings bank, which is like a credit union, where depositors actually buy shares in the organization. As Ponzi continued his scheme, he soon became the major depositor and shareholder of the bank. As his deposits continued to grow, he ended up being elected as the president of the bank. As a result, Ponzi enjoyed the luxury of life while he was busy handling so much money and acquiring more properties. He was so busy that he didn't notice that he had to exploit the discrepancies in the prices of international postal reply coupons. But not all days are with sunshine and rainbows for Ponzi. In July of 1920, the Boston Post published a controversial article where the outlet demonstrated that the scheme was not financially possible. In the article, the media exposed that there were not enough international postal reply coupons that were sold to allow Ponzi to pay the returns that he promised. As a result, some investors came to Ponzi to take their money back and out of his scheme, forcing Ponzi to pay them off with checks that were written on Hanover Trust Bank, a bank that Ponzi had also acquired control of. However, amid the controversy, Ponzi was able to successfully convince many of his investors that the Boston Post article was irrelevant. Ponzi told them that he had another secret scheme that would help them make a lot of money, which was way better than the international postal reply coupon scheme. And honestly, Ponzi was so convincing that his company had a net gain of $200,000 in investment. But it is not all a bed of roses for Ponzi. The challenges didn't stop when a more serious threat arose, targeting Ponzi's company. It all started after the district attorney of Boston ordered Ponzi to stop taking new investments in his security and exchange company until he submitted an audit of the firm's books. As a result, the Boston Post published another article targeting Ponzi's company based on the recent revelations against the latter. According to the report, Ponzi was allegedly in debt of millions of dollars. In addition, the media outlet also discovered Ponzi's past, from where he was born and how he was raised in Montreal, Canada. They exposed Ponzi for being involved in money transfers by Italian immigrants to their families back in Italy, where some remittances never arrived. They also made a report on the time when Ponzi had been sent to prison for forging signatures on checks. The scandal reached nationwide and eventually spread across the world. The Boston Post's article and the Ponzi company's audit eventually destroyed his scheme. In addition, the Hanover Trust, the mutual savings bank Ponzi was president of, was also closed down by the Massachusetts State Banking Commission. Later on, Ponzi was charged with grand larceny. Despite the charges, Ponzi still tried to convince his investors and the public that all these troubles came from the fact that he was wealthy and that he was only being punished because he gave the little guys the opportunity to make a high rate of return. Ponzi was later sent to prison but was released on parole after 3.5 years. Ponzi's criminal tendencies continued, which led him to be rearrested while on parole, but he was able to post bail and went to Florida, living under a different name. While in Florida, Ponzi was again arrested and jailed for a real estate fraud after he promised his investors a 200% return in 60 days. After getting arrested, he posted bail, tried to escape, but was recaptured and extradited to Massachusetts, where he was imprisoned for another 7 years. After his release, Ponzi was later deported to Italy, where he got a job with the Italian airline Alitalia. During his time with the airline, he was working in Rio de Janeiro. However, the airline had to close its Brazilian operation when World War II struck the country, leaving him penniless, which forced him to try various jobs, such as teaching English. However, he still was not successful. While he was trying to find new jobs and earn a living, his health started deteriorating. His eyesight was failing. On January 18, 1949, Ponzi died in a charity hospital in Rio de Janeiro, the Hospital São Francisco de Assis of Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. The Ponzi scheme may have misled people into thinking that the scheme can succeed with a few simple calculations that would help people achieve their financial survival, but it opened the eyes of many and showed them the impossibility of its nature.